everyone, welcome to the long-awaited tutorial series on how to make a simple multiplayer game using Unreal Engine and Amazon GameLift. Now, this won't be your usual tutorial, this will be long and very extensive. We are going to cover a lot of features from the basic to the advanced concepts. What we will be making is what you see on the screen right now. So we are going to make a login screen where clients can authenticate themselves using Google or Amazon Cognito sign-in. We are going to keep track of player stats such as wins and losses of DynamoDB. We are going to implement a team-based and skill-based matchmaking system using GameLift's flex match features. And we are going to implement backfill so that players can join in the middle of games to make up for players leaving in the middle of games. Before we dive straight into the development, I just want to quickly go over the game architecture that we will be adhering to and that the Amazon GameLift team advises us to adhere to as well. The graphic that you guys see right now is actually in Amazon's documentation for GameLift, so the link to this will be in the description below. Let's start with the most obvious part of this picture in the top left where it says your game client. This will be our Unreal Engine client build. So this will have the login screen, and then after a client logs in, they'll see some kind of main menu. Now, to the right of your game client, it says your client service, and underneath your client service are the Amazon GameLift service and external services. In order for the client to join a game server hosted on Amazon, the client has to get connection information about that server. And in order for the client to get that information, the client needs to call specific Amazon services, whether that is just GameLift or other services like Cognito or DynamoDB, for example. The reason why you guys don't see an arrow directly connecting your game client to Amazon GameLift service or external services is because it is generally recommended that you go through a secure and authorized middleman service that directly accesses these services for you. This middleman service is generally in the form of REST APIs hosted on API Gateway, and these APIs invoke AWS Lambda functions. Again, in this graphic, it is labeled as the client service. Now, why is this recommended? Well, the only way for the game client to access these services directly without a client service is by using AWS access and secret access keys, which thereby need to be directly embedded into the client. According to Amazon, this practice should generally be avoided, and we will link a very good article about best practices with regards to AWS credentials in the description below. Then the question becomes, if we don't embed credentials directly in the client, then how do we call these authorized APIs? Well, that is why we are implementing a login system so that we can generate Cognito user pool tokens, which are temporary and contain information about a specific client. So although we are technically still storing some form of credentials in the client, these temporary tokens are generated dynamically. We can limit the rate at which certain clients call specific services, and most importantly, we don't have to ever manually revoke these credentials. This is the most important because if you have access and secret access keys embedded in your game client and these get leaked, then they can be used to call whatever services are allowed by the policies tied to the keys without any restrictions whatsoever, since you don't know who has these keys, considering that you embedded these keys in all copies of your game client. And once you do find out they were leaked, you still have to manually revoke them and release a new client build with a new set of keys, which can be cumbersome. And the last thing I want to say with the client service approach is that by AWS terms, it is serverless, meaning that this client service is completely handled by AWS, therefore you don't have to do the work of setting up your own server to handle authentication, authorization, calling of AWS services, and etc. Back to the original graphic, specifically in the middle of the graphic, there is a picture of what looks to be a server rack labeled fleet with your game server. Let's first start with what a fleet is. A fleet is a collection of EC2 instances. What is an EC2 instance? It is essentially, in very simple terms, a virtual computer that Amazon has somewhere in one of its many data centers. The neat thing about these instances is that you can configure how many hardware resources you want in your instance. For example, how many CPU cores, how much RAM, and etc. Your Unreal Engine server build will be hosted on these instances in these fleets. The green arrow from your game client to the fleet just signifies that your game client will somehow connect to the server. There are also arrows between the GameLift service and the fleet because GameLift handles the creation of matches, thereby the creation of player sessions and game sessions, but your server will also communicate with the GameLift service itself, since it has to eventually terminate these player sessions and game sessions, as well as handle backfill manually. I know a lot of terms may seem foreign right now, but just trust me, I promise this will all make sense eventually. Another key distinction is that arrows between the fleet and the GameLift service are labeled GameLift Server SDK, while the arrow from your client service to the GameLift service is labeled AWS SDK. The reason for that is that the GameLift team has constructed a very neat library for your Unreal Engine server build to use to communicate with the GameLift service, whereas for the client service, you have to use the very big and bulky AWS SDK that has functions tied to every single AWS service known to man. And last but not least, the bottom of the picture, we have remote access at the bottom left, which just signifies the fact that you can always RDP or SSH into your instance or your server is hosted to better debug your server by looking at logs, for example. We will go over how to do this towards the end of the tutorial. To the right of remote access, we have Amazon GameLift Console and AWS CLI. The console is generally used for starting and configuring fleets for your game server build, and the CLI is generally used for uploading your server build to GameLift. They have more functionality, but that is their most common purpose in my opinion. Before we get into development, we have to first get ourselves set up with the necessary tools. Just to note, we will not be assuming anything about your skill level or experience with Unreal Engine nor Amazon GameLift. The only assumption we are making is that you are on a Windows 10 computer. Another warning, in this tutorial series, we will be using primarily C++ with some blueprints for the UI. Don't be afraid though, I promise no matter what that you will learn a lot about Unreal Engine and GameLift, whether it is coding skills or general information. However, we still want your guys' questions, feedback, and corrections in each part of this series, so feel free to comment them down below or discuss them with us on Discord. Link to that will be in the description. Your guys' feedback will be so important because we will gather any necessary corrections and apply them to a combined one video upload of all the parts together. The first thing we will need to download is Visual Studio. For this tutorial, we are going to use Visual Studio 2019, specifically the Community Edition, which is free. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who are going to be using other versions of Visual Studio. The only thing I have to say about that is that you can use an older version of Visual Studio, but there will be some minor differences, for example, the syntax of certain commands used and the paths of certain environment variables we change. If possible, I would highly recommend using Visual Studio 2019 if possible. It has been out for a year now, it will make it easier to follow the tutorial series, and Visual Studio 2021 will most likely be coming out next year. To install Visual Studio 2019, we will need to install the Visual Studio installer, which can be found on the Visual Studio downloads page. Link to that will be in the description below. Once you're on this page, in the middle of the page where it says Community, underneath that, click on the free download button. Once the download is done, start it up. And do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? Select yes, and then select continue, and just wait for the download and the installation to finish. Once the download and installation for Visual Studio Installer are finished, you will see a window with a bunch of workloads. Now for this tutorial, specifically for Unreal Engine, we will need the game development with the C++ workload. Click on that and then go to where it says individual components, and starting with the .NET components, get the latest version of the .NET Framework SDK as well as the targeting packs for the older versions of the .NET Framework. And the reason why you need the targeting packs is that Unreal Engine Source uses different parts of different versions of the .NET Framework. So the targeting pack.
Si quieres vender online, asegúrate de llamar la atención. Ve a Wix e-commerce y crea una tienda online profesional que conquiste a los compradores. Construye una vitrina virtual de última generación y personalízala como quieras. Muestra tus productos en páginas increíbles y vende suscripciones. Ya podemos sentir el aroma de los granos. Expándete a una audiencia global con un sitio multilingüe. ¿Quieres impulsar tus ventas? Toma un café y charla con tus clientes. Cuéntales más sobre tus productos y envíales cupones instantáneos. Facilita la compra con tarifas de envío automáticas y cálculos de impuestos sobre las ventas. Si un cliente deja artículos atrás, invítalo a finalizar su compra con un email de recuperación de carrito abandonado. Administra el inventario y monitorea cada venta desde un conveniente panel de control. Analiza nuestros informes completos de tráfico y ventas. Descubre estas y otras funciones de comercio electrónico imprescindibles para los comerciantes que van en serio. Entra a Wix e-commerce y crea tu tienda online hoy mismo.
Quiero ser CEO de mi tiempo.
De mi tiempo.
Si quieres estudiar, en VIU te ofrecemos una metodología única para que puedas hacerlo todo. Universidad Internacional de Valencia, la universidad online donde nos unen tus metas.
Packs make the SDK backwards compatible. Once you have those selected, go down to where it says compilers, build tools, and runtimes. Select C# and Visual Basic Roslyn compilers as well as MS Build. Once you have all those selected, click on install and wait for the installation to finish. Once the Visual Studio installation has finished, you will be prompted to sign into your Microsoft account, so please go ahead and sign in. If you don't have an account, then please create one. Once you have signed in, you'll be prompted in with this window. Now, if you want to make sure that your Visual Studio installation was successful, you can go ahead and click on any of the options on the right hand side here. We're not going to go over that right now. We're going to go straight into building Unreal Engine from source. In order to install Unreal Engine source, we will need to connect our Epic Games account to our GitHub account. If you don't have either a GitHub nor Epic Games account, then please create one for each. Once you have done that, go to the Epic Games website, link in the description below, hover over your username, and select account. From here on the left side, click on connections, and you will see a GitHub logo. Now normally if you have not connected your account yet, this button over here would say connect. I have already connected my account, but if you haven't, just click on this connect button, which will prompt you to log into your GitHub account as well as authorize Epic Games to access your account. To make sure this works, check in the description below for the link to the Unreal Engine repository. If you can't see this page, then that means you do not have access to repositories maintained by Epic Games on GitHub. To actually download the Unreal Engine source code, we're going to download Git itself. Besides downloading the engine, Git will be used later on in the tutorial directly and indirectly to install different packages and libraries. So go to the download page for Git, link will be in the description below, and click on the download for Windows button. Once that's finished, click on the Git setup executable that you just downloaded. Do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? Select yes. Then select next, 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 and install. And then just let this install. Once that's done, deselect the View Release Notes button and click on next. Now go back to the Unreal Engine repository on GitHub and click on the green clone or download button and copy this URL by clicking the clipboard button. Then find the directory in File Explorer that you would like to keep the source engine in. I personally prefer my Documents folder. After you have found that folder in File Explorer, right-click in File Explorer and select Git Bash here. Once Git Bash opens up, you can maximize the screen and press Ctrl+ to zoom in. Type in git clone space, right-click, select paste, press enter, and wait for the cloning process to finish. After that is done, let's go back to File Explorer where the Unreal Engine source code was downloaded, and what I like to personally do is rename this Unreal Engine folder to be a little more descriptive. So let's right-click this folder, select rename, and let's type UE underscore the version of this engine, which is currently at the time of filming this video 4.24.3. Press enter to set that. Now, the git clone command will retrieve the master branch of the Unreal Engine repository. Therefore, it will always fetch the latest stable version of Unreal Engine. For example, there are previews of version 4.25 that are out, but they are still being worked on actively. Another note that I want to make is to make sure that the directory that this Unreal Engine source code is in does not have a file path that is too long. That is why I generally like the Documents folder. Now we will have to run two programs within this new Unreal Engine folder, so let's open up command prompt by searching it down here in the search bar, and then we'll have to run in administrator mode, so right click the program and select run as administrator, select yes to the prompt, and then let's cd into our Unreal Engine directory. So type in cd, and then to get the path of the directory, what I like to do is double click the folder in File Explorer, get the path up here, press Ctrl+C to copy it, and then in command prompt, let's right click to paste, press enter. I'm also going to maximize the screen so it's a little easier for you guys. And the first program we will be running is setup.bat, which is a batch file that installs dependencies for Unreal Engine depending on our platform, which in this case is Windows. So to run this, type in setup.bat and press enter. The next program we will be running is generateprojectfiles.bat, which is a batch file that generates the Visual Studio solution files. To run this, type in generateprojectfiles.bat dash 2019. The 2019 is just to signify the version year of Visual Studio being used, and we can press enter. Once these two batch files are finished executing, if we go back to File Explorer where Unreal Engine is located, we will now see a UE4 Visual Studio solution file, so let's double click this to open it up in Visual Studio. After the engine is loaded in Visual Studio, if you see under the engine folder where it says UE4 that your project is unloaded, then just go ahead and right click it and select Reload Project. Just to note that this applies for everything under the Programs folder as well, including the Datasmith folder. If anything is unloaded, you have to do the same thing, right click and Reload Project on all of these things that are unloaded. If everything is loaded, we can actually build the engine, but one small thing we need to do before we can actually build the engine is fix a very small code error that only applies to Unreal Engine version 4.24 and Visual Studio 2019. There's a snippet of code in the adiosupport.cpp file that causes a compiler error, so let's look up ADIO support in the search bar under where it says Solution Explorer and press enter to get the search results, and under where it says plugins, runtime, database, ADIO support source, ADIO support private, you'll see a ADIO support C++ file, so just double click that. Let me zoom in for you guys by pressing Ctrl-Shift period a couple times here. And let's scroll down to a couple of if statements here. So there is one if statement that checks ADIO record set. So on line 255 in my case, we need to add a not equal null pointer after ADIO record set. And there's another if statement that checks database connection. For me, it's on line 328. So same thing, just add not equal null pointer, press Ctrl S to save your changes. Now, by the time you're watching this, Unreal Engine 4.25 may be out already, and by the time Unreal Engine 4.25 comes out, this change that I'm coding right now will have already been applied. So if you're using version 4.25 at the time of watching this video, then you can probably ignore this step altogether. I'll also include a link in the description below about these changes specifically. We should be all set to build the engine now. Up here, make sure you have Development Editor selected for your solution configuration and Win64 selected for your solution platform. Then go to the right under the engine folder, it says UE4, right click UE4 and select Build.
En Open English estamos a mitad de precio, para que aproveches estos últimos 90 días del año y alcances tu fluidez desde hoy. El inglés cambió mi vida y también puede cambiar la tuya. Por eso durante la última década hemos perfeccionado nuestro método de enseñanza online. Y como resultado, hoy 9 de cada 10 estudiantes recomiendan Open English.
Just a warning, this will take a very long time because this is the first time you are building the engine. Now, some people have experienced issues with regards to compiling shaders in Unreal Engine Source, so to avoid that, go to the Solution Explorer, scroll down, and build the Unreal Light Mask program separately by right-clicking it and selecting Build. After everything is finished building, let's go ahead and run the engine. To do so, we have to set the engine as the startup project, so right-click UE4 under the engine folder and select Set as Startup Project. Now we can click this local Windows debugger button with the green arrow by it to start the engine. Now, if you don't see this Unreal Editor loading pop-up and it's been a while since you've clicked the local Windows debugger button, then that means you should probably restart Unreal Engine by clicking this red square button to stop debugging. And Once you click that red square, this local Windows debugger button will show up again, so just click that again. And I forgot to warn you guys, if this is the first time you are running Unreal Engine, then it will take a while, so please be patient. Once the Unreal Project browser is open up, just wait for the shaders to compile. After the shaders have finished compiling, let us finally create an actual project in the Unreal Engine by selecting Games here. Then click Next, click on the third person template, click Next. Where it says Blueprint here, click on that and replace it with C++, since again we are making a primarily C++ project. Then select a location for your project to be stored. Me personally, I have a folder called Unreal Projects in my Documents directory, and for the name of this project we are going to call this GameLift Tutorial. So once you have that all set up, click on Create Project. Now you'll know if Unreal Engine has finished creating your project when Visual Studio has stopped running. Once that is the case, find where you created your Unreal project in File Explorer. Again, my project was called GameLift Tutorial, so let's go into that folder and double click the U project file to start it up in the Unreal Engine editor. You may be prompted with the following modules are missing or built with a different engine version. Would you like to rebuild them now? Just select yes. Let's just quickly make sure we did everything right by clicking this play button up here to start the game. Click the game window to control this character and just use the arrow keys and mouse to move around. Once you're done testing this out, press escape to stop running the game, and if that all went smoothly, then congratulations, you have successfully created a project in Unreal Engine Source. That will be it for part 1 of the tutorial. I want to give a special thanks to our patrons on Patreon and all of our donors. If you want to support the channel, links to our Patreon and PayPal will be in the description below. If you enjoyed the video, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Join our Discord, follow us on our other social medias, and see you guys in part 2.